And we're looking forward to this morning session. We will start with Andrew Ferrone, PhD in climate science, and he's guiding the Luxembourg delegations at the IPCC. He's also head of the division of the meteorological department, so he's really an expert concerning the physical background elements of the climate crisis that we're observing right now, and what all the aspects are here. And I'm really looking forward to his presentation, asking about climate heating, Vadis, with the official start with the keynote speeches for this session. Mr. Ferrone, the floor is yours. Well, good morning, dear Minister, dear guests. Thank you for your invitation here today. I'm really happy to be able to give a presentation here today. My presentation today is based on the last insights of the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Klimarat, or Climate Council in German as well. What has been published by the IPCC in last years. In last cycle, there was a quite intense cycle of IPCC with 6 reports on the whole being presented. You can see them here. Special reports concerning global warming, 1.5 degrees, oceans and cryosphere, special report on land surfaces, and then the Working Party reports, Working Party 1 with scientific fundamentals of climate change, Working Party 2 with the impacts of climate change and adaptation to these impacts, and Working Party 3, mitigation, or in other words, how can emissions be reduced in order to make sure that we reach the Paris objectives. And these 6 reports have been brought together in a synthesis report published by IPCC about 2 months ago. And so the 6th cycle is coming to an end now. And in June, the next elections for the next bureau of the IPCC will take place, where the 7th cycle can be started. What are the main results of the 6th report? So first of all, the fact that climate change is to be observed everywhere on the planet, changes in temperatures, rainfalls, droughts, everywhere in the world in the last thousands of years. This has not been the case at all. Concentration, we're talking about 800,000 years for greenhouse gases, 14,000 years for temperatures, so unknown levels. So humanity has never seen climate conditions as we see them today. Next slide, please. Yes, indeed. And it is indisputable now as well that human activities are causing this climate change that we are observing. So man-made emissions are responsible for the increase of temperature since 1850 at 100%, and individual events can be linked directly to climate change elements as heavy rainfall, but also droughts. If you remember, here in Luxembourg, we had very strong rainfall in 2 years ago to floodings, leading to floodings, and there was a direct link that was brought up. And the frequency, we had an increase due to climate change in the rainfall, and the intensity would not have been reaching that level without man-made activities. And the droughts that were to be seen in Western Europe as well last year, almost impossible without climate change effects to reach these levels of intensity. And right now, the higher temperatures we had in southern Europe without climate change, again, this would have been almost impossible. So we can see directly the link to climate change, and it is absolutely caused by human activities, indisputable in this case. Okay, so So the question now, we have reached temperature levels of 1.1 degrees as compared to the pre-industrial times. Warming stripes as indication for that. These are the global warming stripes here. Blue stripes indicating a temperature in a year that was a little bit cooler as in the pre-industrial times. And getting closer and closer to 2020 in this case. The higher the red levels, we have reaching up to 4 degrees on the scale. Right now we're at 1.1 degrees. 1.1 degrees sounds not that big as a value, but you can compare it with fever. Normally, the body would have a temperature of 37 degrees. Once you reach 38 degrees, you don't feel that well. 39 degrees body temperature, you stay in bed, and at the latest at 40 degrees, you have to go to the ER. And it's the same for the planetary temperatures. It's comparable, absolutely. That's temperatures that have been on the increase and never seen like that, at least in the last 14,000 years. If you have a look at the future, it will depend on today's decision, what our future will be like. A different scenario have been presented here from a very high scenario leading up to more than 4 degrees and a very low scenario with 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees as a scenario individually. And you can see also the point from the intergenerational decisions that we are taking. Someone who was born 70 years ago, who is 70 today, has lived through part of the climate change. But someone born today, well, what will the future will be like, especially at the age of 70 again? Well, this will depend on decisions made today. So it's up to us now to decide whether we are going for the very high scenario or the very low 1.5 degree scenario. As I said, we can see that the climate change is already affecting other regions in the world as well. And with every 10th of a degree, we can see that in the latest report, the consequences will be stronger. With every 10th of a degree, that we avoid as an additional warming up will have a reduction of impacts on the environment. What are these impacts on the environment? This is a forest in Northern America. We could see that the dying forests are linked directly to the global warming and its effects, and we see examples like this in the rest of the world as well. And climate change has had an impact on nature, first and foremost, not able to adapt as quickly to these rapid changes, and on humans as well. Of course, next slide, there it goes. Because the climate change is affecting the lives of billions of people, despite efforts to adapt. This is the impact of a tropical storm that might have taken place without climate change as well, but due to the fact that the level of the oceans is on the increase as well, the impact has been stronger on humans and their activities as well. So stronger impact due to climate change compared to normal cases. IPCC says that 3.3 until 3.6 billion people live today in hotspots of high vulnerability to climate change regions. Partially not able to adapt any longer to climate change as of today. And if climate change should continue, it will become even more difficult for them. And you can expect climate refugees, not billions of people, but part of them might be coming to our part of the world as climate refugees. So even today, it is already difficult to adapt to the climate change and its consequences in different parts of the world. And the possibilities to adapt will be reducing. Still, prospects will become further limited if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees in certain regions of the world. It will no longer be possible to adapt at above 2 degrees, according to the IPCC Council. There will be global problems in the food chain, for instance. So the global food chain might be disrupted if we go beyond an increase of 2 degrees. So it's important that climate change is reduced as far as possible. Right now, we are not on track to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees. Emissions from 1990 till 2019 here in this chart. In light blue, CO2 emissions from fossil fuels and industry. In yellow, the net CO2 emissions from land use, forestry. In orange, methane emissions, 2/3 from agriculture and rice culture, and 1/3 from fossil fuels as well. Then we have dark blue, nitrous oxide, agriculture, and then industrial gases in the green part all above. This went to 2019 only. These have been the highest emissions that took place until this year, 2020. There was a massive reduction, obviously, due to the COVID crisis worldwide. But now we've come back to a level above the 2019 levels again. So we are still not on track for the 1.5 degrees. One small positive news is to be indicated on this chart. Nevertheless, having a look at the strong increase in the emissions between 2000 and 2010, 2.1% increase and 1.3 in the next decade. And IPCC says this reduction in the strength of the increase is actually linked to climate policy measures that are being implemented and having an effect at least to lower the rate of increase on a global level. But they're still not strong enough to really reduce at the necessary level these emissions. So climate policies are existing and working. 16 countries in the world have actually managed already to have a sustainable reduction of their emissions. And today, renewable energies have become less expensive as investments in fossil fuels. So economically speaking, it makes sense as well to invest today in renewable energies. Nevertheless, we have to still continue to reduce strongly our emissions. Here, the overview concerning possibilities reached with this method. The red curve here, emissions until 2100, where the globe would be warming up by 3.5 degrees, way above the Paris objectives. Nevertheless, we have to say that at the last IPCC report, we're on a trajectory between 4 and 5 degrees. So things that are being implemented today already are producing an effect. So we're coming down at 3.2%, but measures additionally to reach 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees in green for 2 degrees, blue for 1.5 degrees. So greenhouse gas emissions until 2030 would have to be reduced by 43%, methane by 1/3. That's for 1.5, and for 2 degrees, the reduction should be by 27% greenhouse gas emissions. But in both the scenario, and that's important, greenhouse gas emissions have to reach their maximum reduction as quickly as possible. 2025 is the last year where the maximum should be reached, but the sooner the reduction is implemented, the more possibilities we have to remain under 2 or 1.5 degrees. So it is important. There we go. Well, another point being important here is CO2 emissions to stabilize temperature. CO2 emissions have to reach the net zero. Net zero means that all emissions remaining, certain emissions cannot be avoided. They have to be compensated ideally by biological processes to have dips. And the net zero level for CO2 has to be reached. What temperatures have to be reduced? So if the net zero is reached around 2050, we have to reduction to 1.5. If it's 2070, it's going to be 2 degrees. The later we reach this, the higher the temperatures become. So CO2 sinks are really important in this, in stabilizing the temperatures. How can this be reached specifically now? The slides are not advancing anymore here. There we go. So IPCC has had a look at the different sectors being represented here. Energy, centers, then land use, agriculture as well, industry, urban spaces. Today, almost 50% of the world population are living in cities. That's why urban spaces are playing a major role, everything linked to buildings and linked to transport. But quite new as well, IPCC is having a look at changes in lifestyle, and I want to indicate them more precisely today. Actually, changes in lifestyle will have the potential to reduce global emissions by 40 to 70% by 2050. So the remaining 30 to 60% can be addressed by other measures to try and reach the zero level. Major impact here from leaving individual transportation, walking, cycling at a much higher level, transportation remaining public and private would be electrified. And for houses, measures are being taken. We could see in the energy crisis that with a reduction of temperatures, you could reduce gas consumption as well, being a fossil fuel as well, of course. And all in all, these measures collectively can have a major impact. But it is clear that systemic changes are needed for this in the whole of society, and certain persons have to be supported as well. With the social tensions we are having, it's clear that not each and everyone can afford all these measures. This is linked to part of it to major investments, and I want to talk about investments as well. IPCC has indicated clearly that investments today, instead of going into fossil fuels, should be reoriented towards renewable energies. If this should be successfully implemented, the global investments would be at a sufficient level in order to reach the 1.5-degree objective. So it's not actually so that we would need more investments, but only the existing ones should be redirected towards renewable energies, allowing us then to reach objectives. Leading me to the end of my presentation, I hope that I've been able to convince you that the evidence is clear nowadays. So the climate change is man-made and has major impacts, but the window to reach the 1.5% is still open. It's closing fast, but still open. But we have to act now. The upcoming years, not the upcoming decade, the upcoming 2 to 3 years will be decisive to reach the 1.5-degree objectives. Thank you very much.